Hi there, this is Solid Sharon from Solid Sharon Films, and welcome to another double take. Today's double take features Tony Hancock, 1961's The Rebel, and 1962's The Punch and Judy Man. Now, if you're not familiar with Tony Hancock, he was one of the first huge stars of British television comedy and British television in general. He started off on the radio with Hancock's Half Hour, which was hugely successful in the 50s. And then from 1956 to 1961, his show went on the television as Hancock's Half Hour, and then evolved to just Hancock. His main collaborators were Galton and Simpson, who wrote Steptoe and Son and various other comedies, but Hancock was where they kind of became stars themselves. So The Rebel was his first feature film, written by Galton and Simpson, and then The Punch and Judy Man was his first feature and pretty much last starring vehicle after he kind of fell out with Galton and Simpson. So after this period, he wasn't the star that he once was. He was kind of almost forgotten about. He did a interview on the Face to Face programme, which was a very kind of honest and quite dark and definitely unfunny interview, where he talked about his big kind of problem was self-analysis. He wanted to know what made him funny. He wanted to know why people laughed, and then that was one of the reasons why he then got rid of Galton and Simpson, because he felt, it was their writing that was making people laugh and it wasn't him. So he kind of went down this road of getting rid of the people around him, and then his career and his alcohol problems just got worse, and he ended up committing suicide in Australia in 1968. And one of his suicide notes allegedly said things just seemed to go wrong too many times. So through the passage of time, he's maybe been forgotten about a little bit, but he was kind of one of the first comedians. You can still see his influence. There's a bit of him in Basil Fawlty from Fawlty Towers. There's even a bit of him in the Ricky Gervais character from The Office. His character, Anthony Aloysius Hancock of 23 Railway Cuttings, East Cheam, he always wanted to be better than what he was, or always wanted to project this image of being more attractive than what he was, more intelligent than what he was, and more important than what he was. So he would always come up against authority figures, and he would always try and show that he was better than them or more knowledgeable than them. His famous episodes of his TV show, as against doctors, and the blood donor, or against lift operators in the lift, against judges, against police. He always went against authority figures and kind of desperately want to prove that he was more important than them or just their equal. But of course, he was always brought down a peg or two by the end of each episode. So you could argue, some of his episodes haven't aged as well, but a lot of them still stand up because, again, it's that thin line between comedy and tragedy that he always kind of tread. That kind of clawing desperation that is perhaps now common in a lot of comic characters, but at the time, his stuff was actually groundbreaking, and also it was one of the kind of first sitcoms because it was usually just him or Sid James, who's famous for Carry On films, but Sid James was in Hancock's Half Hour. Hattie Jakes, again, another Carry On character. Hugh Lloyd, John LeMessurier, who's famous for Dad's Army, and a host of other British character actors. So in 1961, in colour is The Rebel, starring Hancock with George Sanders and a cast of British character actors. These are actually 2 new Blu-rays by Network Releasing, and the edition of The Rebel actually includes a copy of the script for The Day Off by Galton and Simpson. This is pretty much the last script that they wrote for Hancock, which he rejected. So you can actually read through that with what might have been. So this is why the box for The Rebel is a bit thicker than the normal Network Blu-rays. It's a wonderful print. I mean, it just has a trailer and an image gallery, but obviously you get the copy of the script. So what's The Rebel about? The Rebel is about a man who's stuck in working for an office. There's a wonderful scene in the office where you have a line of desks and all the people working there are doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And his boss is John LeMessurier, and he has a breakdown and has enough because he wants to be an artist. And he goes home and he's in the middle of chiselling this rather hideous image of a woman. And his landlady chucks him out, so he decides to go to Paris, where all the artists go to make his name. I mean, he is a terrible artist, but again, that doesn't stop him chasing his dream and going to Paris, where he falls in with a group of artists. One, bizarrely, which I only noticed watching the film again, is Oliver Reed in a very early performance, I'm guessing. So when he shares a flat with another artist, and because he knows nothing about art, he just starts spouting incoherent nonsense, essentially. But of course, the artists start paying attention to him, even though he knows nothing, but he's just spouting this new philosophy of the infantile school. He paints literally like a child. But of course, all these arty, pretentious types just eat it up. He falls in with Nanette Newman, who plays an existentialist, and this is a whole group of existentialism who all sit around. And there's a surrealist played by Dennis Price who has a cow in his bedroom, and it's just these wonderful scenes, obviously taking the mickey out of the pretentious side of art. And then George Sanders turns up as a famous art critic, who the other artist is so fed up that the fact that Hancock's getting all the credit and all the adoration that he's never had in the 6 years that he's been in Paris, he goes to London and leaves his work behind. But of course, George Sanders comes in hearing about Hancock, and he sees the other artist's work, and he thinks it's amazing. And of course Hancock tries to explain. He doesn't try very hard to explain it's the fact that it's the other artist's work. And then Hancock is now seen as a genius, and they go to Monte Carlo and they have exhibitions, and they're planning to go back to London. And he's obviously loving this because, again, he is now an important person. He is now seen as this artistic genius. Women are falling at his feet. He has this job in Monte Carlo to sculpt the wife who's obsessed with him, of this rich and powerful man. That doesn't quite go according to plan. But they go back to London, and at this point they've used up all the other artist's paintings, so he's desperate to find the other artist who's staying in the same rented accommodation as Hancock did at the start, with the same landlady, Mrs. Cravat. And then obviously it turns out that he finally kind of fesses to the fact that it's the other artist that's made these wonderful paintings that George Sanders loves and everybody loves, and it's not Hancock at all. So Hancock goes back to his life of doing terrible sculpture. It's wonderfully shot in luscious Technicolor, quite lurid Technicolor. Hancock is famous for his expressions, and this one's no different. There is a kind of obviously knowing comedy and kind of laughing at the pretentious side of art, and it's a fun little film. But again, it didn't catapult him to superstardom like he perhaps thought it would. So at the end of it, it was pretty much the end of the Galton and Simpson and Hancock relationship. So then came 1962 and the Punch and Judy Man. Again, this is a new Blu-ray release by Network Releasing, which only has a trailer in a gallery, but the print is really nice. And again, it's the normal thickness for a Network Blu-ray. The Punch and Judy Man. I wouldn't necessarily call this a comedy. It's not laugh out loud funny. It's closer in tone to Tony Richardson's The Entertainer with Laurence Olivier. This is perhaps Hancock going back to his childhood in Bournemouth, which is a seaside town, and it follows him as a Punch and Judy Man, not surprisingly, aided by Hugh Lloyd, married to Sylvia Sims. John Le Mesurier is a sand sculptor. And again, this is more of Hancock's clawing desperation to be something, to be better than what he is. So the kind of his anger is pointed at the local politicians, the mayor, who are arranging this 60-year anniversary for the town of Piltdown. And his wife Sylvia Sims is desperate, again, because she wants to be in with the in crowd, and he begrudgingly goes along to perform. Again, I wouldn't call this a comedy. It's really quite dark. There's a bitter vein that just runs through the whole film. His attitude to his wife Sylvia Sims at times is really quite nasty in comparison to The Rebel, which is very colourful and kind of there's a joy at kind of thumbing the nose up at the pretentious art community. This one really is quite bitter and angry. There's some funny scenes, but I wouldn't actually categorise this as a comedy. If you're looking for a real downer and a real depressing film, it really is quite depressing in a good way. If you're looking for that, if you're looking for a knockabout comedy, the Punch and Judy Man is not a knockabout comedy. You know, you see him after he's had an argument with his wife. He then takes that kind of anger from the argument out on Judy in the Punch and Judy box. Punch is literally beating the shit out of Judy and the baby. And you can see Hancock's face. He's got gritted teeth. He's really like laying into it. There is a beautiful scene where there's a boy in the rain that always turns up to all their shows, and he's missed his bus, so Hancock takes him in for a Piltdown Glory, which is the equivalent of a Knickerbocker Glory, I guess. And the guy behind the counter really doesn't like Hancock, and he pretty much has to eat the Piltdown Glory the same way the little boy is eating it. And again, there's no dialogue. It's just all Hancock's expressions and the guy behind the counter expressions. It's a really beautiful piece of almost silent comedy, and it's a wonderful scene. But again, the kind of, you know, this kind of corrupt-ish mayor, you know, the local businesses are obviously all taking backhanders. In Hancock, you can feel just the rage and the kind of indignation of the in crowd and his dislike of it. It does kind of end on a slightly upbeat note, but it really is quite a dark film. And again, I mean, Hancock would appear in films like The Wrong Box and little cameos, but the Punch and Judy Man was his last kind of feature role. It was the last kind of hurrah. I mean, one of the reasons he fell out with Galton and Simpson was because, you know, he wanted to try and be a bigger star, and he felt that they were writing stuff was kind of too small and too parochial. And then he does the Punch and Judy Man, which is about a small British seaside town, which is kind of perhaps a weird choice. But these are two films that, if you know about Hancock, if you're a fan of Hancock, they are must-buys. Network Releasing have done a really nice job on the prints. The old DVDs were like pan and scan. These are really two films of perhaps a bygone time, a lost era. And yes, Hancock's Half Hour may have aged, but I don't think, if you're a fan of comedy and the history of comedy, especially British comedy, Hancock shouldn't be forgotten about, and he certainly is one of the most important figures, you know, along with the Goons, that kind of started, you know, British comedy that would go to, you know, obviously Spike Milligan from the Goons to Monty Python to the alternative comedy that came up in the late 70s, early 80s. Hancock is an important part of British comedy, and he shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, these two films will eventually, I mean, Network Releasing just had a recent sale where, for example, I got like 12 films for like 60 quid. So these will be cheap at some point. So if you're a fan of Hancock or you're a fan of British comedy, I would definitely recommend picking them up. But certainly with Punch and Judy Man, don't expect a laugh out loud, crying with tears of laughter type experience. It's a dark, bitter, melancholy film, which is just the kind of films I like. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of Tony Hancock if you have seen The Rebel and the Punch and Judy Man, and hopefully we'll see you again for another double take episode. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitude Rowan saying farewell.